With this chapter of One Piece, we return to God Valley, and the reveals just keep getting crazier and crazier each and every step of the way. The cover page of One Piece chapter 1159, titled The Island of Destiny, features Yamato, Ulti, Page 1, and Onimaru eating apples on their way back to the Flower Capital. So we'll be able to see how much and what has changed since Yamato left, which will also let us know how Momonosuke's been doing as Shogun so far. And it's pretty funny that Ulti doesn't even take her mask off when she eats. The flashback resumes on Pirate Island 39 years ago. The island was in an uproar and in search of a certain someone. Don Marlon, Capone's criminal predecessor and a member of the Rocks Pirates, was dead. He was guarding Hachinosu's greatest treasure and was soundly defeated. Rocks couldn't believe his ears. Whitebeard was just as disturbed by the news. Shaki had been kidnapped. It only took a few hours for it to happen, and there were no leads. But those words were accompanied by Ochoku happily counting some money. So it seems like he's a traitor. Gloriosa, on the other hand, was having a breakdown over the loss of her sister. And it wasn't just her. Most of the pirates on the island were crying and felt helpless. Elsewhere, Roger received the news and tore the paper apart. He cursed Rocks for letting something like this happen right under his big nose. Rayleigh was trembling as he read about Shaki's abduction. He knew that Roger had a crush on Shaki and tried to be a good friend by stepping back. But because of that, Rayleigh missed what could have been the last time he would ever see Shaki. So the regret he now felt was immense. And this was grim news for pirates the world over. Shaki's situation was so depressing that the global economy all but froze for many weeks. Imagine being a bounty hunter and catching a big-name pirate only to be turned away because now's a bad time. We fast forward to 1 year later on God Valley. Garling had finally returned and was happily greeted by the mother of his children. Overjoyed, she introduced baby Shanks and Shamrock to their father. Garling was pleasantly surprised to see the lively twins. Their mother asked Garling to stay on the island so they could all be a family. With a smile, Garling let her know that if they were going to live together, it definitely wouldn't be on God Valley, because soon the island would be gone. Not to mention the fact that he already had a proper wife in mind. He just needed to win the upcoming event. The red-haired woman was really confused. All the while, marine ships were surrounding the island. Suddenly, the woman was reaching out in trembling desperation and agony. Garling ran her through, right next to the stroller. With no remorse to be found, he easily issued the command for the preparations to begin. The Marines agreed and had just touched down on the island. And with that, Figarland Garling might just be the worst father in One Piece. At the very least, it's between him and Sanji's dad, Judge. The locals were confused. They had no idea why so many Navy ships would be surrounding their home. They wondered if they might be searching for a dangerous criminal and decided to bring their children inside. The Marines were ordered to use tranquilizers and capture if someone didn't resist. A young Marine asked his superior what the goal of their mission was. The Lieutenant Commander claimed that this was a training exercise and insisted that the youngster stop asking questions. When the cadet didn't quit, his squad leader was scolded instead. One of the locals approached the Marines wondering what was going on. They put him down. Then they aimed at a woman with 2 children. Natives shouted at one another to run, but they still had no idea what was going on. The cadets shouted that the people they were after were ordinary civilians. His squad leader told him to stop asking questions and focus on completing the mission. Breathing heavily, the young Marine tried to convince himself that nobody would die since they were just using tranquilizing rounds. He promised that if they came quietly, he wouldn't shoot. And if it wasn't already clear, this is a young Monkey D. Dragon. And if we are getting both Shanks and Dragon in the same chapter, then you already know we are in the end game of the series. And you know what? Finally, I can see the family resemblance. At this age, Dragon does look a lot like Snake Man Luffy, so that is a great design there. Two rowdy civilians were confused, but insisted on leaving the island. So Dragon took them both down with one shot each. Just then, sleeping gas began to overtake the forest, and all Marines were told to wear masks. Dragon just looked up, clearly uncertain about what they were doing here. Dragon also seems to be wearing an armband with the same symbols that he now has as a face tattoo. So while I'm sure it's personally significant, I don't expect the meaning to be anything too spectacular in the grand scheme. But what about Dragon's power? Here, he doesn't come across as notably strong or anything like that. Between his rank and demeanor, he definitely reminds me of Kobe, which makes me appreciate the friendship between Luffy and Kobe that much more. He's using a gun, but they all are on account of the tranquilizers. Although, I bet Conqueror's Haki would make this a whole lot easier. And in the Devil Fruit department, God Valley is the place to be when it comes to picking up incredible abilities. But we'll get back to that soon. We then make our way to a Navy prison ship. But instead of detaining criminals, this one had slaves as cargo. And a communicator was ringing. In the communications room, a child snuck past a Navy officer, one who thought he might have seen something. Moments later, Jenny rushed back to Eva. Her mission was a success. This is when she was able to send a message about the island 2 weeks ahead of the event, which turned out to be one of the most important decisions in modern history. Even so, an old-timer warned the kids not to be so loud or do anything rash, since they'll be punished as a result. And that last bit really annoyed a certain someone. Ivankov loudly mouthed back that there's no point in dying with the information. That if they want to be saved, they actually have to make an effort, since miracles don't come cheap. Ginny did her best to hold him back. It didn't take long for the Marines to react and mobilize. Meanwhile, Kumo was just happy to see that there were still slaves with a bit of spirit among them. And although this is them at their lowest, I am really happy to see these little rascals again. Next, there was Cypher Pole's Intelligence Bureau, our first look at an actual headquarters for the mysterious government agents. They were dealing with a common, albeit unique, informant, one who was certain that they already knew about the transmission Ginny sent out. One of the agents questioned how some kid with a newspaper was always able to collect such sensitive information. Another one tried to threaten the boy with erasure. The bird boy dared them to try. Secretly, he was also planning on leaking the information to Hachinosu regardless. But he still wanted to be paid to keep it quiet. So even 40 years ago, Morgans was a first-rate hustler. This also confirms that he has had his devil fruit powers for a very long time. And after some time, the news hit Hachinosu. Ochoku was the first one to question if the source was reliable. If anyone found out that he played a part in Shaki's kidnapping, the entire world would be out to get him. But according to Stussy, the Marines were in an uproar, so it was definitely legit. Gloriosa was really relieved after a year of worrying. And I can only imagine how the Kuja pirates must have been feeling, especially since the leak wasn't sent to them. But now Rox's crew knew that the Celestial Dragons were responsible and were using Shaki as a prize for their tournament. Whitebeard heard about the human hunts before, but never believed they actually happened. Big Mom focused on the inclusion of Devil Fruit prizes and asked Kaido if he still wanted one. The Oni remembered Whitebeard's advice and wondered what powers the fruits had to offer. Big Mom also figured that they'd be great for her children to have. Drusen suggested that it might be a trap, but Rox didn't want to hear it. There was no more need for discussion. Cowards could stick around if they wanted to. The rest of them would be headed to God Valley. And you know what? I think it's actually so hilarious that nobody mourned Don Marlon. Not a single person mentioned his death. It's just Shaki. Everyone is talking about Shaki and wants to go save Shaki, but not a single revenge plot for their friend or crewmate, because yeah, they just don't actually care about each other. But news made its way to Roger's ship of friends as well. So the captain asked Gabon about God Valley's location. The navigator admitted that although it was far away, they would definitely make it in time. And with that in mind, as a navigator of the crew who found the One Piece, let me know if you guys think Gabon is the best navigator in the world. Roger asked his friends if they were with him on this, and a battle cry rose up. Rayleigh was extra fired up this time, so at least he'll be honest about his feelings from now on. Knowing that Rox was already making his move, Roger refused to fall behind, and once Garp knew that Roger was going, he made the same travel plans, which we saw before. Garp didn't mind Rox heading there since they stole from Pirate Island, but Roger was a different story. And just like that, two kids, Ginny and Morgans, orchestrated a leak that moved all of the strongest men on the seas. And one of those men was a giant. Elbaf's royal vessel towered over Rox's ship, but Rox stopped his crew before they could attack. King Harold was surrounded by guards. He was able to intercept them thanks to the knowledge that Rox and his crewmates were obsessed with Shaki. The king added that if they ignored self-preservation, they could easily sink Rox's ship. Harold also pointed out a nearby ship, one that was dedicated to government surveillance. Rox mocked the king for still kissing up to the world government. He warned the giants not to underestimate his crew, but he also wondered if King Harold would be alright with tearing each other apart while the world government took it easy. In that case, he'd just be a madman with a twisted idea of progress. Rox figured that the two of them should have a private chat. Moments later, King Harold was pouring a drink into a giant sake cup. So here we have another one of those friendly drinks ahead of a character's death. In fact, this may have started the trend. Rox and Harold, then Roger and Whitebeard, then Whitebeard and Shanks. And now, I'm kind of afraid that when Luffy and Shanks finally reunite, it'll be under circumstances like this. Rox was sure that Harold already knew where they were going and what they planned on doing. But there was something else he wanted to share. Something that he couldn't tell to anyone else, not even his own crew. The giant guards wondered why their king would bother talking to the man. Rox's crew was impatient and insisting on saving Shaki as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Rox admitted to having a secret name. His real name is actually Davy D. Xebec. King Harold didn't expect that at all. Xebec was sure that the world government was trying to erase the name for a long time. And that's because it is connected to the bloodline of the legendary pirate, Davy D. Jones. So yeah, the plot thickens. Even now, the name still has a bit of influence in the underworld despite being so rare. Rox explained that 2 years ago, he had a child. Although, he couldn't say for sure if the timing was good or bad. To keep them safe, he sent his wife and child back to his hometown. He told them that they could count on the Davy clan. So technically, Blackbeard's name isn't Marshall D. Teach. It's not even Rox D. Teach. It's Davy D. Teach. King Harold accepted his words, but wondered why Xebec was sharing his weakness. That's when Xebec told him that God Valley is his hometown. Harold couldn't believe it. He wanted to know if the whole thing was meant to lure the Rox pirates in. But no, Xebec was sure that they wouldn't want him crashing a Celestial Dragon event. Concluding his drink with a heavy breath, Xebec concluded that they just made a mistake. Tossing the cup, he couldn't help but feel like this was all the work of destiny. Taking Shaki was a huge mistake. For Rox, as long as he can save his wife and child, he'll be fine with whatever comes next. But what if he can only save one of them? What if his wife doesn't make it? That said, he wasn't feeling very lucky right about now. So he called on Harold to join him. He said he wouldn't with their last fight, but he just couldn't help himself. But even now, King Harold screwed up his face and refused. claiming to sink the pirate ship here and now. Disappointed, Xebec accepted and was ready to fight. King Harold told his guards not to get involved, much to their shock and confusion. The confrontation ended with Rox's crew continuing while the giant ship burned. This was probably just a bit of spectacle since the government was watching. But knowing that the government regularly hunts humans for sport, I hope King Harold is beginning to see how the world actually works. Speaking of which, we're reminded that every 3 years, the Celestial Dragons select an unaffiliated nation with abundant resources, where they hunt the helpless population for sport. And across all the islands that have suffered such a fate, there hasn't been a single survivor. The 100,000 so-called rabbits begged for salvation. They questioned how such atrocities could be allowed to happen. But now, it is time for the main event. The day of the God Valley incident is finally here. Shakuyaku was presented as the tournament's grand prize. As a former empress and the most beautiful woman in the world, she was more highly coveted than all of the rare devil fruits up for grabs. The tournament's winner would be able to take her as a wife or a slave. The demented freaks were swooning, and their hairstyles have never been more accurate. At the very least, since being captured, Shaki has been totally unharmed and untouched. A member of the Shepherd family insisted that St. Summers win her for them. Now, notably, the backdrop stage here has actually changed. Instead of 6, there are now 9 devil fruit prizes on display. That is a pretty big deal. We concretely know the identities of 2, Kuma's fruit and Kaido's fruit. But now we also know that Big Mom was planning on feeding them to her kids. She managed to snatch Kaido's, so I think it's safe to guess that she could get another one if she was willing to give it up. At this point, Big Mom doesn't have many children. Well, at least not for Big Mom. During this flashback, we've seen 3 of her oldest sons, Katakuri, Daifuku, and Oven. Daifuku's Hoyo Hoyo no Mi is a paramecia type that lets him summon a genie from his body. This is pretty far removed from the food and cooking theme that most of the family has going on. But that definitely seems like the sort of power a world noble would be interested in. So if we consider that the 3rd, then that just leaves 6 more incredible devil fruits. It's as if we've made no progress at all. If Monkey D. Dragon ends up having a devil fruit power, then I can only imagine that getting it from the God Valley incident would be very fitting. But despite all the spectacle, Shaki remains stoic. Here, Shaki is definitely inspired by Helen of Troy. According to Greek mythology, Helen of Troy was the most beautiful woman in the world. And when she was abducted, thousands of ships set sail to rescue her, which resulted in the forever iconic Trojan War. St. Summers let his family know that when he wins, he'll be turning Shaki into his personal possession. But Garling wasn't about to let that happen because he planned on making Shaki into his wife if he wins. And this is how these sickos express their affection. Gunko was also among them in a different outfit, and she was alongside a member of the Man-Mayer family. No sign of the other knights just yet. But now we know that when Garling said, "Watch this, children," he was referring to the infants Shanks and Shamrock. Elsewhere, Dragon followed a blood trail and discovered a red-haired woman. She begged the Marine to save her. She needed him to save her babies. Not from the hunt, but from their father. So Luffy's dad is partially responsible for the path that Shanks took in life. But somehow, they only managed to save Shanks. Garp might not even know that his own son is on the island. Garp had a child way ahead of his contemporaries, but there is no way that he'd be able to adopt a celestial dragon's child, especially when he had a twin brother running around with the most eye-catching hair color possible. So the duty was passed on to Roger, and the king of the pirates apparently asked for the same favor in return when it came to Ace. But we all know how that turned out, so although he's a really likable guy, Garp's choices are just very questionable across the board. And you know what, after all this, I can see why Dragon kept away from Luffy. If this is how a celestial dragon treats the mother of his kids, how do you think he'd treat yours? At the very least, we have an idea of how a 2-year-old Blackbeard and his mother were treated. They were in a cage, and his mother was intent on her son's survival. And seeing how bruised they are, I'm gonna need rocks to make some heads roll here. With this in mind, Blackbeard's path in life totally makes sense. Imagine if the reason Blackbeard never sleeps is because he's too haunted by these events. And with what they did to his family, it's impressive that he isn't more vengeful. And in a way, Ochoku's betrayal inadvertently saved Blackbeard's life. If it wasn't for the whole Shaki thing, most of these guys wouldn't have shown up. Even so, Blackbeard packed Ochoku up with the Rocky Port incident. Yet Karibu, who might be his kid, is a huge Blackbeard fan. Go figure. After that, a final announcement shook the island. Every tournament features rare targets. But aside from a member of the Buccaneer tribe, for the first time in 800 years, they also had members of the Davy clan. So these guys have been in hiding since the Void Century. And now, Blackbeard's multiple selves and Devil Fruits seem like they may be related to his clan. The hype is real. One Piece is really good right now, so I hope you are enjoying it as well. As always, I'm /Botaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.